Hey, today's guest is Lilly Rachels, and she is a relationship coach who helps individuals identify and break unhealthy emotional patterns, connect with their core values, and communicate with clarity and confidence. With a master's degree in social work and a background in therapy and trauma sensitive yoga, Lily specializes in inner child work to guide clients toward creating healthy, lasting relationships. Lily sits on the advisory board for Survivors for Change, an organization that provides education, advocacy, and wellness resources to support sexual abuse survivors on their healing and justice journey. Lily currently lives part time in Nashville, Tennessee, and part time on the road in an RV with her romantic partner and their pups. I am giving away a free metabolic health bundle. This includes a Garmin fitness tracker. Garmin is a leading brand in fitness trackers. This particular model that I'm giving away does track your heart rate, your sleep, your steps, and a bunch of other things. But then, in addition to the fitness tracker, the winner will get a choice between either two individualized nutrition sessions with me or free entry into the Restart program, which I've mentioned on previous episodes. If you would like to enter this giveaway, go to beavercreekwellness.com/giveaway. As of the time of this recording, I do not have very many entries into this giveaway. Now, to be fair, the giveaway goes for a few more weeks until the end of February, but if you want a really good chance of winning, enter right now, beavercreekwellness.com/giveaway. Welcome to the Real Food Mental Health Podcast, where we explore the powerful connection between mental and physical health. My name is Cody Cox, a holistic nutritional psychotherapist, and I'm here to guide you on a journey to true wellness, mind, body, and spirit. If you're tired of quick fixes and want real solutions that address the root cause, you're in the right place. Let's get started on your path to lasting wellness. So, Lily, can you share what inspired your transition from conventional therapy to what you're doing now?
Yes, I'd love to. So I came to the therapy world through yoga and the exercise world, and I got really interested in hearing people's stories because I noticed people like to tell me about their lives when I would be in the gym with them. And so I decided to go get my master's in social work. And I worked as an adolescent therapist. And I had a client come in one day who I was doing her intake, and she had clearly been through at least 5 or 6 therapists from the company I worked in. She just, told me all about all of the stuff going on with her, like she had done many times before, and started telling me about the different prescriptions she was on. And it was like an antidepressant, anti-anxiety, something for her stomach to help with the anxiety, antipsychotic. There were so many medications she was on. She was 17 years old. And I was just sitting there listening to her share her past trauma like it was nothing, just, repeating it as quick as possible, trying to update me on her. And I remember kind of leaning back in my chair and I said, "Have you had any water to drink today?" And she just looked at me like I was crazy. And she was like, "No." And I was like, "Well, when's the last time you had a glass of water?" She was like, "I don't know, a couple of days ago." And I told her when she left that day, I was like, "Your assignment is to drink at least 6 cups of water for the next week until you see me again." I was like, because like your body and brain isn't even in a place where like what we talk about and we work on, like we need to take care of the vessel. Like we have to support your body so that you can, work through these things that you're coming to me for. And that was kind of the moment where I started to get a little disenchanted with the traditional world of therapy. And I wanted to take a more holistic approach and involve more than just, talk therapy, CBT, more than just the mind, but really the body and our whole experience as humans.
Yeah, I like to say that I address more of the bio part of the biopsychosocial model of therapy. And most therapists, frankly, aren't equipped to do that. Like we're taught the biopsychosocial, but we kind of gather the medical history of our clients or our patients, and then we just focus on the psychosocial
Mm-hmm.
for the rest of treatment. And so by doing more of a holistic approach, we're still addressing the psychosocial, right? But then we're also considering maybe even directly addressing that bio side too, which is so, so important.
Absolutely. I think about, if you want to work through something that feels like it's in your head, but you're not even supporting just the health of your brain in general, it's hard to ask your mind to do these things when you're not giving it the support. Or, I know you do a lot with nutrition. It's like the nutrition, or even I do a lot physically with my background in personal training and yoga. It's like the movement of your body and just taking care of the vessel that's carrying your mind around.
And it's amazing. I was actually just telling my wife the other day, I was like, I think we would have a lot fewer divorces in America if only we would all eat whole foods and take care of our nervous systems. Like, I think in most cases, divorces come from people just being in a sympathetic dominance, or otherwise known as a fight or flight state, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
stressed out, they're anxious, they've got so many mood issues, irritability, they're less patient with each other when it comes to relationships, that it causes relationship problems. And so you specialize in, like, you mostly work with relationships, right? So what have you seen, like what seems to be the most common issue in relationships as far as like a holistic perspective goes?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest breakdowns in relationships comes in communication and how we let each other in, how we talk to one another. And I love what you shared about, it's like, a lot of people, they're in survival. They're in that sympathetic charge, that fight or flight. And when we're in that place, it's really hard to interact in a nurturing, loving way with the person in our lives. And unfortunately, it's often the person that we say we love the most that gets just the worst version of us. And I love what you said. If we were all more regulated and nourishing our bodies, then we would be in that state more often, where we can be more receptive to our partner. But what I see a lot in relationships is, again, if you're in that state of survival and maybe you're feeling frustrated a lot or anxiety a lot, when we don't know what to do with that and we're not taking care of ourselves and able to regulate, maybe we suppress it and we try to just ignore it and it festers, or we project it onto our partner and we start blaming them for where we are because it's that closest person to us. And
Mm-hmm.
you're married, like, it's sometimes it's a lot easier to look at, oh, maybe something's wrong with her, this is with her, than to look at ourselves, because it's can be really uncomfortable to look at ourselves and take ownership of what we're bringing to the relationship or what we're really not bringing to the relationship when we're in that state of survival.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I actually have a degree in sociology, so I like to analyze the social things too. And I hadn't really thought about that, about how we tend to nitpick with the person with whom we're closest to. And it's probably because we're just around them a lot. And so we start to look past their positive qualities and look for the negative qualities to try to figure out, like, how can we become closer to this person? And I mean, I think that's a subconscious thing. We're not like intentionally doing that,
Yeah.
but it creates a lot of conflict
It
where
does.
we hyper focus on the negative. But then if we are in that sympathetic dominance, that fight or flight state, or the stressed out state, the anxious state, whatever we want to call it, we're naturally going to be more negative.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be less patient. We're going to be less pleasant to be around, even. And so, how would you address that if you were working with a client who had that issue, or maybe a couple of clients who have that issue? How would you address it?
There's a book titled Fierce Intimacy. I don't know if you've read it, by Terrence Real. And in it, he talks about the core negative image you have of your partner. And I like to use this when I'm working with clients because it's the worst possible version of your partner that exists in your head. It's like their villain persona. And when we're upset, when we're stressed out, a lot of times we filter what our perception or our perspective of our partner through this core negative image that in reality, your partner's never going to be as bad as this kind of negative image in your mind. And so one of the things I'll do when I'm working with someone who comes to me, if they're in a relationship and they're trying to turn the relationship around and get back to a place where it feels safe, secure, and loving, is to get really curious about, like, what is that worst version of your partner that exists? And if we bring evidence into it, like, is there evidence that that is supported? Is there evidence that, that is actually who your partner is? Or is it all the assumptions you're making about the situation? Or maybe it's past relationship baggage you've brought into the relationship that's affecting this negative image you have. And so we'll work on that. And then also towards kind of bridging the gap into, like, how could, if we're going to make assumptions, which let's try not to, but how could we, assume positive regard and kind of give our partner that benefit of the doubt instead of letting our brain immediately go to that worst case scenario, that villain persona of our partner.
And that the unconditional positive regard, for listeners who are not aware, that's kind of a normal thing among therapists. So Lilly is a former social worker. I am currently a counselor, and I think we both have that ethical guideline that we're supposed to follow. It's a very difficult thing to have unconditional positive regard, especially when you are physically feeling lousy.
Mm-hmm.
And so that mind-body connection is so important. Lily, how would you address it with yoga?
With yoga, well, I want to go back real quick because talking about that mind body, whenever we're talking about relationships, I personally believe it's like the first relationship you really need to focus on is the one you have with yourself. Because if you have a
Yeah.
negative self-image, if you have a bad relationship, maybe even an abusive relationship towards yourself, it's very easy to project that negativity onto your partner or assume that's how they feel about you. Now, bringing yoga into it, what I love about yoga is the mindfulness piece. It's great for
Yeah.
your body. It's very calming, very grounding, but it's bringing yourself to a state where you're kind of, one of my favorite things about it, you're kind of cutting out the noise in the world and you're focusing on just one thing. Maybe it's, the asana, the movement, and the breath, and you're giving yourself a space to regulate and a space to ground yourself, especially if you're someone who can maybe struggle with feeling more emotional and you're not really sure what to do with your emotions, or like you said, you're in that fight or flight response. It can be a really great grounding technique. At least that's what I found when I do yoga.
Yeah, and I feel like you kind of made a segue into yoga when you were talking about that self-acceptance, because to me yoga is all about that self-acceptance. And I mean, yeah, it's honoring those around you as well. But I come to that a lot in my clinical work, where it seems like so many people have this issue of a lack of self-love,
Mm.
where, like, if you're practicing yoga, asanas particularly, and you're being mindful with those movements, your breath, your surroundings, you sort of develop that self-love as you come to accept who you are as you are in the present moment. And I think it does start with that,
Yeah.
where we tend to project judgmentalism or hatred or whatever toward other people when we don't necessarily love ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, coming back to that practice, when you're practicing that grace and care and softness towards yourself, and that becomes more of a learned behavior where, I find when I, whether I'm going to the gym or I'm doing yoga, it's sacred in the sense that I'm being kind to myself. I'm not punishing myself by doing yoga. I'm being kind. I'm giving myself something I need. And when you give yourself something you need, it's easier to then give that same care to your partner. But if you're
Hmm.
constantly, if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not nourishing yourself, you're not nourishing your body, again, it's hard to give that nourishment to someone else if you don't have it. It's kind of the saying of, you have to fill your cup first. But it's like you do, because then you have nothing to pour out into a relationship or into any relationship around you.
Hmm. Yeah. How has your background in trauma informed yoga and social work shaped what you're doing now?
Yeah. So the trauma informed yoga, that background, I really worked with women that were coming out of domestic violence. And so a lot of the like trauma sensitive yoga is really taking care and like making sure safety is established before you, especially when it's the asana, the actual physical movements, before someone goes into different positions, because some things can be very triggering to someone, particularly if they faced physical or sexual trauma to their body. And so I would say how that's influenced my work, the yoga side of it, is establishing safety, especially with a client. That can be, emotional safety, really bringing them into a grounded place. A lot of times when I start like a call like this, well, I guess we're doing audio only, but a call with my client, particularly if they come in and I can tell they're kind of in that flight mode a little bit, like they're not really settled, they're feeling anxious, I'll bring them through either a meditation or some sort of orienting exercise, and it just establishes that safety. And that was
Mm-hmm.
something that definitely came out of the trauma-informed yoga. And then my social work background, I think, really plays into, the empowerment and giving people tools and resources to help themselves. I've told clients before that, my goal in working with you is that you don't need me anymore. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to be someone that you're talking to years from now again and again. I want to equip you with the tools that, the next time this situation comes up in your relationship, like, you can work through it because you're empowered to work through it. And now you have the skills that you need to work through it. And you've dealt with whatever it was that was blocking you in the first place.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I've been telling people for years, my goal for you is to not need me anymore.
Work your way
And
out of the job.
it's kind of the opposite of the way the medical system is set up. I mean, technically, therapists are sort of part of the medical system. We are healthcare providers, but the way that they often do it is we want you to come back for checkups because that's a consistent income for us.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that you actually need the checkup. It just ensures that we'll have that consistent income to stay in business. And therapy doesn't quite work that way. I think I had like one person a few years ago actually come to me for a mental health checkup, and he was a police officer. Like I really admire him for recognizing that he might need that. But I was like, we don't really do checkups in therapy, but I mean, we can talk for a few sessions and see how you're doing, and I'll do what I can to help you feel better if that needs to be the case. But yeah, it's kind of a business model, and I've been telling people, like I said, my job is to make you not need me anymore because ultimately we want you to be self-reliant. We
Yeah.
want you to have the skills that you can use on yourself and not have to keep hiring a professional to teach you those skills or to walk you through them.
I completely agree with you. And something I found, because I focus, more on relationships, is, a lot of times, depending on how you grow up, like, you might not have gotten the skills on, how do I handle conflict? How do I communicate my needs and my desires to another person? And so, therapy, coaching, those can be great places to get those skills. But yeah, it's not, while I would, while I care about people and I want to, them to know I'm always there. It's like, this isn't a lifelong relationship, meaning like, now you get to go off and use those skills and grow and, yeah, take care of your problems because you have that ability now. It's not going to feel completely overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually did have a client who I think I saw him for like 3.5 years. And some people do. Some people are in therapy for years or even decades, sometimes even with the same therapist for that whole time. And hopefully that's not the case for most of us. Generally, we just want to get that help, whether it's a coach or a therapist or whoever, just maybe for a few months.
Mm-hmm.
And we've learned those skills that we need to be mostly self-sufficient, to go off on our own and start practicing what we learned.
I know the times in my life where I have sought out a therapist or support in another way. It's typically been for either a specific event that occurred in my life or something that became really apparent I needed to work on. And every time it was really successful. But I think part of the success in my experience was we were very clear, about like what I wanted to work on and where I wanted to get. And so those goals, they were measurable, And that was really helpful for me. I don't know if that's been your experience at all, or if you've, done your own, sought your own support in life.
Hmm.
But yeah, and I've said the same thing to clients where I'm like, I don't want to become an expensive best friend of yours that you just come and talk to. I want, our time together to be productive and contribute to where you want to get to in life.
Yeah, it is interesting. I've had many, many people come to me and they're like, first I ask them, tell me what brings you to therapy. And they say, well, I just wanted someone to talk to.
Mm.
And I'm like, okay, well, you do realize therapy is going to take some work. It's not just sitting back and talking. And sometimes I have to keep reminding people. They come and they vent for 50 minutes or an hour, however long it is. And after a few sessions of that, I'm just like, okay, just reminding you, you're paying for the sessions and this is not what therapy's for. But if you're okay with just venting and paying for it, then okay, you're just not
That's
really
your
going to
prerogative.
progress.
Yeah.
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 But as far as communication in relationships go, do you use any like specific theoretical approaches, maybe informed by your social work experience or anything in particular that you found to be really helpful in relationships?
When I look at like different modalities, motivational interviewing, I think the concepts from that can be really helpful in relationships when it comes to communicating with your partner. And one of the biggest things I find that breaks down communication, especially during conflict, is couples will fight about two different things in the same conversation and not be
Hmm.
aware that they're doing it. So I'll have like the thing that's bugging me, and my partner has the thing that's bugging him, and we think we're talking about the same thing, but we're not. It's almost like we're having these conversations almost parallel. They're not intersecting, but it's getting more and more frustrating. And so, in motivational interviewing, there's asking open-ended questions, but what I love is the summarizing and paraphrasing what you heard and then
Hmm.
saying that back. And I always have my clients, I'm like, and then say, this is what I'm hearing. You can summarize it and say, is this what you meant or is it something else? Just so you can get on the same page, because I see it all the time where relationships will disintegrate because of misunderstandings. And I've told friends and clients in the past, I'm like, I'm not so set on you two staying together. Like, that's my goal in life, is not to make sure that your relationship works, but I want to give you the tools so that like you're very clear about, again, what you want, what you need, what you're fighting about, so that you can make an informed decision and you guys can either move forward together, or if the relationship doesn't stand the test of time and it's not meant to continue to go forward, you're clear on why. It's not on a misunderstanding or
Hmm.
because you were just on two separate pages. You can kind of get back on the same page. So I found motivational interviewing to be really helpful in cutting through the kind of clutter of
Yeah.
conversation.
Motivational interviewing has been so helpful in so many contexts. I've even heard that it's taught in business school.
Mm.
And so like it's not just a therapy thing, I think they even teach it in like life coaching courses and nutritional courses. I think it was even covered in my nutrition course. um, and it's such a good tool to have, and sometimes I feel like it's a bit manipulative, which makes me a little bit resistant to using it.
I could see that being used in sales.
Uh-huh.
I could see the tactics that could be used to be manipulative, um, especially if you're trying to ask questions to get a certain answer.
Yep.
And I think the other thing I talk to my clients a lot about in communication is really coming from a place of curiosity and not making assumptions about your partner or trying to manipulate your partner, which, I think sometimes if you come from a place where you've struggled to use your voice and be direct, it can feel more comfortable to be kind of passive aggressive, which can be more manipulative. And I could see that, yes, there could be kind of that the dark side to any tool, I guess.
Hmm.
But you're right. That's interesting. I haven't done business school, but I'm like, I bet they do teach that in sales.
Yeah, yeah, it's totally a marketing thing. And I've even wondered too, like as providers, coaches, basically those of us who are in a helping role, if we're using motivational interviewing, are we manipulating our clients into getting better? Is that an
Mm,
ethical dilemma? What do you think?
that's interesting. That's interesting. I think it comes from how much are you trying to decide what's best for your client and how much are you letting them lead and
Yeah.
decide what's best for them? Because I think this also can show up a lot in like a parent-child relationship where it's like you have in mind maybe the best direction for your child or where they should go, maybe say after high school. And it can be very tempting to really push someone and guide someone towards what you think is best for them without taking into account that like they might have a say in that. And I see that particularly when people come to me. That's why when it comes to their relationship, I'm like, I'm not here to be the one to say you need to stay or leave a relationship, that this should last or not last. I think really letting the client lead and kind of choose the direction that they want to go can keep you from that like ethical dilemma. But if you're trying to lead and almost create the life that you think your client should have, then I would say, yes,
Mm.
that's waste. I would say stepping outside the bounds of what the role is.
Yeah, well said. And do you ever teach motivational interviewing skills to clients so that they can use them with each other as part of a relationship?
I would say the skills, it's more pieces from that. So again, in conversation, when we talk about becoming like communication, becoming a better listener, I'll have them use that, this is what I'm hearing you say, and then summarize what you heard and then asking for clarity. Is this what you meant or something else? I teach them that tool because again, it can cut through the misunderstanding.
Hmm.
And it helps us stay curious instead of, and maybe you've been there, I know I have, where you're having a conversation and you're listening, but what you're doing at the same time is kind of thinking through your own response in your head. It's almost like you're preparing your rebuttal instead of staying present with the person in front of you. And so I do teach them that tool too. Again, it's like, let's summarize what we heard or paraphrase what we heard and ask for clarity. Like, is this what you meant? And then give your partner the opportunity to say, that's exactly what I mean, or no, you're not hearing me correctly.
Hmm. Do you feel like there's a place for like medication in relationships, like maybe an antidepressant or anxiety medication? Do you feel like there's a role in that for?
Yeah, I have very mixed feelings about medications. And I had a supervisor once that the way he defined this, I thought was very useful. He said, a medication is like clogging the hole in the boat while you use therapy and other tools to get the water out. And so I think a medication can be used along with other sources of support
Hmm.
if it's necessary. I don't think it's, there's a this is good or this is bad. I think it depends on the situation. Unfortunately, what I have seen in working with people is kind of an over medication. And I had a client recently who was put on an antidepressant by a doctor. And I knew from working with her that she was grieving because she had lost actually a pet that she was very close to. And her experience, like in working with her, could see was like she was going through the stages of grief. But when she went to the provider and talked about how she was, sad, they saw it as we need to medicate the depression.
Hmm.
And she actually ended up getting off of the medication because it's caused several other things that were not helpful to her. And so I I personally don't look at that as the first choice. I think there's so many things we can do to support our body, whether it's physically, nutritionally, and then support ourselves, whether there's, past things we need to work through. And I don't know if you've seen this, and I'm actually really curious, but I know when I was working as a therapist, the majority of the times I would have a client on a medication, whether it was depression or anxiety, most of the time what they were experiencing in the moment could be linked back to, in my case, when I was working with adolescents, early childhood trauma.
Hmm.
And it broke my heart because they weren't getting the support initially to address the trauma. They were getting just the medication to mask and kind of band-aid the symptoms. Have you had that experience at all?
Yes, definitely. And I think that really is my big issue with conventional psychotherapy is it's more about masking the symptoms. And once again, to go back to the medical system, we do the same thing in um, physical health too. So when we see a doctor, a physician, they do the same thing. They write you a prescription to mask the symptoms, but they don't really look into what might be the root cause of the problem. And I mean, to be fair, I think a lot of people do just want to mask symptoms for the rest of their life because it's just easier,
Mhm.
but they don't know what they're missing when they could address that root cause and feel better and not need that medication for 80 years or however long they end up taking it.
Yeah, and I do get that because I've always been someone, and even when I go to the doctor, if something's bothering me, I'm like, I don't want a pill. Like, I want to know what I can do to get better. But I can see how tempting it can be when it's like when you feel awful and you think, well, if I could just take this, I don't have to do anything. But I'm with you. I wish more people would understand that, you know, and I've had this happen too with clients that would come on, particularly antidepressants, that it might kind of numb those uncomfortable emotions that they're feeling, but it's also numbing the joy that they're feeling. And it's keeping them in this kind of numb state in general to life. And I always think about if you were to watch a movie in grayscale, or maybe add just a little bit of color back, but you're not seeing like the vivid color of life. And when we, whether it's, an antidepressant, anti-anxiety medication, we don't get to just pick and choose which emotions we really get to experience.
Yeah, and in many cases, something like an antidepressant keeps you from feeling emotion at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've heard that from many, many people with one medication in particular that to the point that it causes a person to feel apathetic about life.
Yeah.
And I even have a family member who was taking that medication at one point, and he said, my house could be burning down around me, and I would just shrug my shoulders and say, eh. And I'm like,
Mm.
yeah, that sounds like that particular drug. And so we do have to weigh the pros and cons of these things where it's like you were saying with your metaphor of plugging up that hole in the boat so that you can remove all the other problems from your life while you get therapy. I do think medication has its place, but my personal clinical philosophy is more in that we use it as a last resort.
Yeah. Yeah.
If somebody is maybe they're suicidal, they are just totally unmotivated to make even the smallest of diet and lifestyle changes, then maybe medication could help them to just get them back on their feet so they can make the diet and lifestyle changes. But I would emphasize the diet and lifestyle once they're capable of doing it,
Yeah.
just for the sake of sustainability. And I was even taught, I don't know if it was in graduate school or like a training that I did, but even in conventional training, we are taught that medication, especially psychiatric medication, is meant to be taken while you are getting therapy. It's
Mm-hmm.
not meant to be taken alone
Yeah.
because because pills don't teach skills.
Oh, that's a great way to say it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does make me sad how many people, whether they're clients or people I know, who will get prescribed something and they're not getting those skills. And I think too that because I've friends that have I don't have children, but I have friends that have children that talk about, how many of their friends, peers are on like an anti-anxiety medication. And it has me thinking that, maybe we're not doing a very good job teaching kids and young adults that it's okay to feel uncomfortable, that we don't have to, we're not designed just to feel, fantastic all the time, that, sadness or even the sensation of, feeling anxious, like it's part of the human experience. And those emotions are signals. They're not something to be like labeled good or bad.
Hmm.
That there can be healthy and unhealthy expressions of them. And we can, obviously, if we suppress our sadness, then that could lead to feeling more depressed. But the sadness alone isn't a bad feeling, that it's an emotional signal. And especially when I hear about kids that are prescribed like the antidepressants and the anti-anxiety medication, that I'm like, I wish someone was teaching them more, that it's like, this is a full range of emotion that's available to you. And again, it's like, you want to feel like all the emotions, like we have those for a reason. Like, we're designed to be able to feel.
Yeah, and we live in a culture where it's not okay to feel.
Mm.
Like we're taught to suppress those emotions in the workplace, in a school setting. And I mean, that's where those two places are where we spend most of our time as Americans. But it's not okay to be human for some reason. But imagine what that's doing, especially for little kids, where it's like, oh, well, stop crying. You're not allowed to cry. And I wonder too if, like, you were talking about how, like, we shouldn't label emotions as good or bad, but maybe we could just shift that terminology to pleasant and unpleasant. But I'm going to make the very clear point that unpleasant isn't necessarily bad.
I say comfortable and uncomfortable to experience, because I, again, taking it back to the physical body and the gym, I I love to work out, and doing squats with weight on your back is not comfortable. It's not a comfortable sensation. It's I feel tired. Now I feel stronger after I do it, but if I was like, well, I just want to be comfortable, then I might lay in my bed all day on a fluffy pillow. So it's like, being uncomfortable isn't bad for you. And so even experiencing an emotion that's not necessarily a comfortable sensation in your body, it doesn't mean that it's bad and wrong. It's just like you said, is it pleasant or is it unpleasant? And
Mhm.
reframing that instead of labeling, because I don't know about you, but I remember growing up, I thought, being sad was bad and being angry was bad. And so I suppressed a lot of emotions early on because I was afraid to feel them, because I
Mhm.
didn't want to feel, the bad things.
But in many cases, when you feel those things and express those things in a healthy way, it helps you to resolve whatever problem is in
Mm-hmm.
there. And
Absolutely.
uh, I was also thinking when I did my nutrition training, we had a class on stress, which as a therapist, I was like, I feel like I'm pretty good with stress. Like I know how to address that. But one thing that I wasn't taught before was the fact that stress can be a good thing. And so we've got distress. That's the stress that arguably could be a clinical problem. Or we also have eustress. So eustress, EU, is the positive stress. And so, for example, if you are exercising, maybe you're lifting some heavy weights, you are putting stress on your muscles, on your bones, maybe even a little bit of psychological stress during that process, but that is good stress. And so, not all stress is bad, but I would say even distress can be good too, because we learn life lessons, we learn skills on how to navigate the trauma or whatever it is. But I think there's always something good that comes out of stress in general, whether it's distress or eustress.
I think it can be motivating to us to change, whether it's our circumstance, something in your career, something in your physical health. It's like, again, it's like a signal. And when we're really comfortable all the time, there's not really a need to change anything. So sometimes, like, I'm with you, I think that stress can come in and be kind of a little bit of a fire starter for us to realize that, oh, this needs to shift, or maybe I need to look at this thing.
Hmm. Yeah, and yoga, kind of going back to the yoga thing, I was thinking as we are doing the asanas, the deep breathing, we are experiencing that distress, that eustress, maybe more distress when you're a beginner yoga practitioner, but it can really help to build resilience and skills, particularly that self-love we were talking about earlier, mindfulness. Just there's so many things that happen in yoga. I love it. And I wish more people would do it. I even wish that I did it more.
Oh, I completely agree with you. I think it should be taught in schools. I think it, being able to, even the meditation part of it, being able to sit quietly with your own thoughts. It's a great way to build resilience.
A guest recently told me that something like 95% of podcasts fail within the first few episodes, and I can see why, because there is so much time and energy that goes into the production of a show like this one. If you would like to support me in the production of this podcast, go to ko-fi.com/Cody Cox. That's ko-fi.com/Cody Cox. You can pay a couple dollars or you can pay more if that's something you can afford. But either way, I'm going to continue to produce free content for as long as I possibly can because this information is so important and I want everybody to be able to access it. Thanks so much for listening today. Kind of shifting a little bit more toward relationship coaching, what would you say are some misconceptions about relationships? I mean, we kind of alluded to those a little bit earlier, but now, particularly, what are some misconceptions about what might be causing relationship problems and misconceptions about solutions to improving relationships?
I think a misconception about relationships in general can be that when you meet someone, that they will be able to, everything else goes away. Like all the pain you've experienced before goes away. And I've said this to clients that I'm like, you're not going to meet someone that can just love the trauma out of you, that can love you enough that you don't have to deal with anything that's ever happened in the past because you're putting so much pressure on that person. And I think in general in relationships, I look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and I look at like my grandparents' relationship. And their relationship, it was really, that lower level of the pyramid where like they needed each other. They needed each other for, whether it was, economically, kind of survival at that point. And then my parents' relationship, it was a lot more of that love and belonging. They got more of that. But now I look at relationships today and I think we're almost expecting another person to get us to the top of the pyramid with that self-actualization. Like we just are expecting so much out of another person that the relationship doesn't live up to our expectation. And we forget that, we all come in, to a relationship with whether it's our own baggage from past relationships or, our own desires for what we want a relationship to look like. And so again, I think a big misconception is, as soon as I meet the one or I find this perfect person, everything will be perfect and we'll just get along magically. And so then people aren't prepared to, have to navigate conflict with someone because even if you meet someone who your compatibility levels are just, off the charts, there's still going to be outside pressure and stressors that you'll experience just being a human on this planet outside of the relationship that can affect the relationship. And so, yeah, I think a misconception again is just having kind of a crazy expectation of what you should get out of another person.
Interesting that you brought in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a concept that I'm totally fascinated with, but I never thought to apply that to relationships. I have noticed too that some people skip the different levels of the hierarchy. And some people do okay with it. Like, for example, maybe you're homeless, but you are really, really spiritually oriented. And I mean, life could be better in some ways, but some people are very happy skipping those levels. But
Mm-hmm.
I think in most cases, you do need to start at the bottom and work your way up.
Yeah, yeah. And again, when I apply it, kind of the concept of relationships, it's to me, it's not expecting another person to meet all of our needs. And
Hmm.
realizing that if you put that much pressure on one other individual to meet every need you have, it's too much pressure on the relationship. And I find people are kind of constantly disappointed because again, we carry these kind of there's a Chris Williamson said it well. It's I always call them unverbalized expectations, and he's called them premeditated resentments. Because if
Hmm.
we're not, if we're not really clear about what we need from someone or what we want from someone, and we don't talk to them about that, then we can start to resent them, even when they're not aware that they're not doing it. And so when I think of, kind of bringing Maslow's hierarchy of needs into that, it's like if we're expecting someone to just kind of hit every level, so to speak, or get us to this self actualization, it's just so much pressure on another person.
What's one piece of advice you'd give to someone feeling stuck in unhealthy emotional or relationship patterns? Like if there was like one broad stroke of advice that you would give to most people, what seems to work for just the general public?
Well, I would say something that I think to anyone who is either in a relationship and they want it to get better, or they want to be in a relationship, kind of a broad stroke, and it might sound like a complicated thing, but it's to get really curious about that first relationship you were ever in, the one with your parents or your primary caregiver, whoever raised you. And, asking yourself kind of those questions of, whose love did I crave the most when I was younger? And what did I think I had to do to get it? It might give you some good insight to what you're either searching for in a relationship or what you're trying to get out of another person. Because a lot of times, like whatever it was that we really craved and we really wanted when we were little, we will search for in romantic partners.
Well said. And where do you see the intersection of holistic mental health and relationship coaching evolving in the next few years? Are you kind of hoping that that'll change direction, like as far as popularity goes or legislation goes?
I think we're moving towards that. I really do. I mean, I'm an optimist, so I typically have an optimistic view of the future. Just that's, I always say I have like the optimism bone. That's just how I've always been. But I see them becoming more and more integrated. I think people are realizing more and more that, it makes sense that we have to take care of ourselves physically in order to take care of ourselves mentally and
Yes.
emotionally. And I'm very hopeful that that trend is going to catch on more. And even noticing, people realizing the importance of getting outside and putting your bare feet in the grass. And I feel like that is growing more and more, this even kind of coming back to nature. At
And that
least in the circle I'm in, I've noticed more people kind of adopting this mindset.
and that might be one thing we can thank social media for. Like I'm personally not a huge fan of social media, but it seems like that perspective has grown because of things like TikTok and Instagram, where people are sharing videos, they're sharing memes about holistic health, the importance of having your bare feet in the grass, or um, eating whole foods, things like that. And I'm really hopeful for that too. And I've been hearing from a lot of people that holistic health is going to just explode in popularity and demand. I still have yet to see that, I think, but I can see things kind of coming together
Yeah.
to where it could happen soon, to where I don't know if it'll ever become totally mainstream, but I'm hoping.
Yeah, at least less taboo.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know if it will, be mainstream, but I think less taboo, and I think being more in the Western world, like the Eastern philosophy, is becoming more ingrained as well. So I hope that we have that. Again, I'm going to stay optimistic.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know anything about the history of natural health or holistic health, but it was totally the norm a couple hundred years ago, even in America. It was totally the norm until Rockefeller injected a bunch of funding into Western medicine to further the research, further the development. And I don't know how long ago that was, like over 100 years ago, I think. But once that happened, what we now know as Western medicine started to dominate everything else.
Mm.
And so all we're doing right now with the the changing climate of how we see health is we're just shifting back to old ways. And it's not that things that are old are outdated or worse. It's just that maybe we're just realizing that we were right before and we're going back to it.
Yeah. It's like a rediscovery.
Yeah, a rediscovery, back to our roots. One last question for you, Lily. If you were to change one thing about how people approach health and wellness, what would it be?
I would want people to approach it with grace and with a real care for themselves. I see a lot of people approaching, whether it's fitness or, dieting, because they'll go the dieting route, almost like they're angry with themselves and with their body, and they're trying to punish it to fix it. And I would love for people to come into it more as, with care. Like, I'm doing this because, again, coming back to that love, like, I'm doing this to show myself love, not to punish myself. I'm not running on the treadmill so I can earn my dinner. I'm nourishing my body, and I'm just coming to it from a place of like just love and grace towards self.
You can't heal a body that you don't love.
Yeah.
And I'd say a mind too.
Mm-hmm.
You have to start with that self-love.
Absolutely.
Where can people find you if they want to find you to maybe work with you?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. I'm Lilly Rachels on the different platforms, and then relearnrelationships.com is my website. So that's where I have some longer form content and some free resources. So if you want to find me, that's the best place to go.
And it's Lilly.
Yes.
Lilly Rachels. Okay, awesome. Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review. That really helps me out. And also subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. Real Food Mental Health is intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. The information presented on this podcast is not intended to replace any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. While I am a healthcare provider, I am not your provider. Always seek the advice of an appropriate healthcare practitioner with any personal questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. Reliance on information provided by this podcast is at your own risk.